Well, I think the French will contest quite a lot of the points. But what has really, really irritated the French and President Macron, I think, is the publication of the letter on Twitter. He felt that he had a grown-up conversation with Boris Johnson on Wednesday night after this terrible drownings, that there was some basis for talks there, and that by publishing the letter, he's undermined those talks by going public, and making points that are, in French eyes, clearly unacceptable. The French have been saying for months and months that if there is to be a returns agreement, it has to be with the EU as a whole and not with France.
Can you help us out with that? And I'm sorry to interrupt you. Our listeners don't get this, and it's important because those are the people, our listeners, who are mostly likely to shoulder the economic burden of a great deal of this. Certainly they feel, and in many cases they're right. It's not about the EU. The reality is that these people are coming from France, not other countries. So why should there be a discussion with the EU as opposed to bilateral discussions with France?
Well, the French point of view is that France is just a country of transit for these migrants, that they've been through at least one other EU country before arriving in France, and only stay in France for a matter of weeks or months, sometimes for days. And that therefore, if there was to be an agreement, a returns agreement, it has to be with the EU as a whole and not just with France. That's been the French position for months. Boris Johnson knows that. I mean, he knew perfectly well that France was going to refuse this offer, and that for the French eyes, there's no basis of talks on this offer, of proposals. So it's seen as a provocation from him, and I suppose it comes against the context of what the French see as consistent provocation from him over
fishing. Well, I'm sure fishing, and this is really an extension of punishing the UK.
Fishing and submarines.
Fishing and submarines, and it's a way of punishing the EU for Brexit by other means, which is, you would agree, well, I'm sure a lot of our listeners would agree, was a pretty outrageous thing when you think about the number of lives that have been lost. When you look at these 5-point proposal, I'm no Bojo fan. I'm somebody that claps him on when he gets something right and stands in the wing booing like most people when he gets things wrong. But looking at every one of these proposals, they are issues that only the French government can solve and help with, and most critically, to reduce the amount of human trafficking that's going on and to stop the lives of women, children, and chiefly men being lost at sea. Why do we need to enter discussions with central Poland in order to solve this problem?
I mean, I'll come back to what the French position is, that if there is to be a returns agreement, it's to be with the EU as a whole. They've consistently said that they don't want a Franco-British agreement over this. The other French, if it came to a Franco-British agreement, you don't get something for nothing. So they would, in return for agreeing to some form of return of migrants from Britain to France, they would ask for Britain to send over Home Office officials to Calais to study asylum claims for people wanting to come to Britain on French soil. And that's the sort of area that France is looking at. I imagine that would be unacceptable to the British government as well.
Well, I'm not sure about that. At the moment, the traffic is really coming one way. Now, what you're able to help us with, Adam Sage, I think, is how would you characterise the relationship between Mr. Macron and Johnson in the past? I mean, it's never been particularly an entente cordiale, to say the very least, right?
No, you could say that. Well, I mean, the relations between France and Britain this year are really at a worse level than I can remember, certainly since the Iraq War, or maybe even before that. I mean, they're right rock bottom, with a lot of distrust and bad blood on both sides. I mean, over the migrants, over fishing, over the submarines, over the Northern Ireland Protocol. So I mean, you're starting from a very, very difficult place for any kind of agreement, I think.
Now, lastly, where do you think this is heading now? I mean, it seems to a lot of people that however you look at it, when you look on the balance of fairness, who's getting it right and who's wrong, who's bon and who's mauvais, that's French for good and bad, it's all the bad on the side of the French. Moving forward, what's going to happen here?
I don't know. I think that it's very difficult to see where an agreement is going to be reached on this. I mean, one of the points that Boris Johnson made about intelligence and information sharing, the French consistently claim that the British police fail to share information about smuggling gangs, and that their requests for help on dismantling smuggling gangs are not met by answers from the British police. So, I mean, I think there's a level of distrust that is not only political but at a police level as well. Yeah. It's difficult to see where a settlement is coming.
Well, it may be difficult to see, but a settlement has to come. Yesterday it was 27, unless this is solved, unless the French do something. And, you know, like I said before, I'm no cheerleader for the British government to get it right. We clap when they get it wrong. We're here to ask them to apply common sense. But it seems to me that this is toute la française. Anyway, thank you very much, Adam Sage, for your sage advice.